Hi, folks. Larry Rolla here. This week, I'm going to do something a little different. Um, this podcast in the last 6 months, I've gotten tens of thousands of views between mine and other podcasts that I did. And that's great. And I appreciate everybody who listens. I started the podcast because some friends of mine convinced me to write a book about my life. The friends that convinced me were ones that knew of my my life since I was a kid, and I did, and that's why we started the podcast to promote the book. And I've gotten hundreds, thousands of letters and phone calls and emails uh, and questions pertaining to things that I said. 99 and 9/10 were good and positive, and but there was 1% that were not. And in the beginning, I answered them, and the people who asked the questions kind of understood where I was at, and I try to put them in my shoes at the time, and in most, if not all, understood. But the questions keep coming because the views keep growing and growing, and many of these people, the new people that view these podcasts that are on, is I think 44 or 45 of them up there now. They didn't see the answers, so I'm gonna breeze right through, and hopefully, and I'll be able to fill in a lot of the cracks or some of the cracks and answer a lot of the questions that keep coming in. And again, I want to let everybody know I really appreciate you folks out there watching this podcast, and I only wish I knew how to do live podcast where people could just come in or text in or however you do it. I know nothing about this stuff, and this way I could sit and I would sit for hours just answering questions like many of the other guys that have podcasts too. I don't know how to do it. Maybe I'll learn because there's a lot of questions out there because I did a lot of things. And so I'll just start off by saying this. I knew early on, very early on. In fact, it started when I was 16 years old when they threw me out of school, and for punishment, my mother put me on the docks on West Street. I had to get there by 5:30 in the morning and stand on a corner with a bunch of older men who really needed the work, who had families, and they put me in a pea coat and a one of them hats and with a hook on my shoulder and put the collar up so nobody would see I was only a kid. And because my Uncle Pepe ran the piers, I was chosen to work over grown men who needed to work. And I knew then, and I learned then that without connections, it's a tough road. Life is tough. It's not easy. It's not fair. It's tough. But I learned early on that connections and money make things a whole lot easier. But it is what it is. So I I went from there, and I left that job early because my mother, after 3 weeks, he took me out of there because I was losing all my money at the crap games, and put me with my cousin Pete, who ran Mid-State Spectre in Maspeth. And I'm going to try to keep these things short because I don't want to go through the whole thing, but I just want to let you know the series of events that got me to the point where I was at. And she put me with my cousin Pete, who ran the trucking outfit. They gave me the night shift, so there would be no crap games, no nothing. But I was, because there was nobody around, I was starting to steal all the trailer truck tires, steal freight, and I eventually stole 3 trailer loads of Cuddy Sark whiskey that back then I was able to get rid of them thanks to a friend of mine back then, John Gotti. We were only kids. We were 16, 17 years old back then. And John had more connections as far as swag and everything goes than I did. But that kind of life, it kind of ended. And what ended it, what made it come to an end was not my mother who I drove crazy and who did everything in her power to try to put me on the right track, and nothing worked. And I mean, if it was today, she'd be in jail for life for what she put what she did and what I put her through. That made her do these things. I mean, beatings and beatings and beatings. And like I said once before, I was the only thing that she ever failed at in her whole life. And one day it came to an end. And I got caught and I got arrested by Detective Sands at 114 Precinct. And they gave me the beating of my life and put me in a hospital for a few days with broken ribs, broken nose, fractured skull. Um, and when I was released, my mother took me to her boss. She ran all the dress factories for Tommy Lucchese. And those of you who don't know who he is, he was one of the founding members of Casa Nostra, um, one of the original ones that started way back. And he controlled Manhattan. He controlled everything in New York. And my mother took me to his office, and he said to me, "Your mother is my friend, and she's a good woman, and you're breaking her heart with all your nickel and dime bullshit." And he gave me a little talking to. And after I left, and he told me, he says, "I want you to think of who I am and what I said. And if you want to straighten your life out, I will help you in any way I can. And whatever problem you have will go away." And I left that meeting and thinking about the pain and torture I put my mother through and how the things I was doing would only lead to jail, death, or a dead end. And at that point, I really straightened out my life. I made a complete U turn. And from that point on, I never did anything wrong. And I'll skip right ahead into the horse business. I got into the horse business in 1960. And once again, because of a favor I did to somebody that was sick up in Buffalo, and his owner was a wealthy guy that was good friends with the presiding judge, they gave me a license as a favor because of the favors that I did for the trainer that he had that was very sick, and I took over his horses for a while till he got better. So once again, it was the connections that got me what would normally take 2 or 3 years. I got in 2 or 3 months. So I came to Roosevelt Raceway, and at Roosevelt Raceway, I applied for stalls. And the reason I applied for stalls was because when I came back, and this was about a year and a half now since Lucchese talked to me, um, I told my mother, and she was the first time in her life she got a call from me that wasn't from a hospital or jail or a police station. And it was all good. And she was so happy. And she told Tommy Lucchese, her boss. And Tommy sent for me. And I went in back in town, and he handed me an envelope with $20,000 in it. Now, this is in 1960, 61, 62, something like that. And it was, I never saw that much money in my life. And he said to buy whatever I had to buy. the horses, equipment, whatever. And if I needed more, just ask. And whatever I needed, he would get. So I applied for stalls. I bought 4 horses. I applied for stalls at Roosevelt Raceway, and I was turned down. And I called up my mother. I didn't know what to do. It was a brand new game for me. I never been in that spot before, and it was an industry I wasn't familiar with. I just know I love racing horses. I love the horses, and I was very competitive and had a competitive streak in me. So I called my mother and I said, Mom, Tommy Lucchese gave me $20,000. I spent it all on horses and equipment, and now they wouldn't give me any stalls to race. Now, I understood that Roosevelt Raceway at the time was a premier racetrack, and I knew that the top guys in the country were there with the top horses. And I understood that you had to pay your dues to get to that spot. But I told my mother, and my mother told Lucchese, and Tommy Lucchese called up the owner of Roosevelt Raceway, who was Morton Levy, and I was told to ship my horses. There'll be 4 stalls waiting for me. And once again, the connections worked. Where I would have had to ordinarily race for years and years at smaller tracks, but the connections worked. And I was given stalls, and I was given whatever I want. In fact, I was the only provisional driver at the time allowed to drive at Roosevelt Raceway, and it was exciting, and I did well. And I got a gigantic write-up, a full-page write-up in a newspaper, because I think I won 7 or 8 out of my first 10 races, or whatever it was. And they interviewed Stanley Danson, Billy Houghton, and George Schulte, who were the leading drivers at the time, and they all gave me great reviews, and I was on my way. And the meet ended, and I went to Yonkers Raceway. Now, keep in mind, I'm skipping right along. The newspaper article put me on a pedestal, and it was something that was I was not used to. And I was given a lot of offers, met a lot of people, and one day at one race at Yonkers, when we shipped to Yonkers Raceway, there was a race that they said that I didn't try, that I stiffed a horse, which was not true. I won't go into it, but it was not true. And I was told by the presiding judge at the track that the owner of the track, Marty Tannenbaum, gave me 48 hours to get off the grounds. Now, naturally, I run right back because I was accused of something I didn't do. I ran right back to my mother, and I told her the whole story. And she says, well, I can't bother Tommy now because he's in a hospital with a malignant brain tumor, and he's not in good shape. So the next thing I did, and I knew that I had to somehow get to this Tannenbaum guy who owned the racetrack. So right after my write-up, like I said, I was introduced to a lot of people. They put me on a pedestal. I was like the new the new superstar coming up. And I met a guy. I was invited to dinner by a guy who I met called George Ranke. And George Ranke brought me one night to a restaurant in the city called Jack Dempsey's restaurant, I think it was. And who was at the table but the famous jockey Eddie Arcaro, 2 or 3 other people. I even believe there was the mob guy, Frank Costello, there. And there was another guy that they introduced me to called George Monahan. And they introduced me. I knew who everybody else was, but I didn't know George Monahan. They said he was the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, and the commissioner of harness racing. And I met all these people. So when I couldn't get to see Tommy Lucchese, I got a hold of George Monahan through George Ranke. And I asked him, I told him the story, and I asked him if he knew Tannenbaum, because what he accused me of, I didn't do. And I wasn't even granted a hearing or anything. And he said that he did know him. And he said he could fix this for $20,000. And once again, I knew I had the connection, but sometimes you need the connection and money, and I didn't have the money. So I went to I forgot his name. I think it was an Italian guy. He was the head of the Horsemen's Committee at Yonkers and Roosevelt, and I asked him for help. And I told him the story. I really didn't do what he accused me of doing. And he says, "Look, he's the owner of the track. He can do whatever he wants. There's nothing I can do." So the horseman couldn't help me. Nobody could help me. And I spent the next 4 or 5 years going around the country at the smaller racetracks and basically starving to death. I was put in a bad spot. And many of the people that asked me questions say, why didn't I just get out of the business at that time? And the reason I couldn't get out of the business at that time was because I made a commitment to Mr. Lucchese, who was still alive but not in good shape, and my mother, who I made the happiest lady in the world after I changed my life. And I just couldn't believe the injustice that was happening to me. That I couldn't even get a hearing, I couldn't get nothing. And for those of you that don't know, even if I was granted a hearing, which I was many years later in 1984 when they accused me of something again, the people that you appeal to are the same people that accuse you and convict you. But there's a law that's written that you have the right to appeal and have a day in front of an administrative judge. Now, the administrative judge, it's really an administrative law judge, and what they do is they preside over contested cases and provide a neutral forum where all the evidence for all parties are presented. Well, in my case, that time in '84, she said I was completely innocent and that I should be granted my license back. Well, part of that rule is that the Racing Commission has the right to overrule the administrative judge. So the people that convict you are the same people that overturn the administrative judge. Now, a lot of people that call in say that I was responsible for the harness racing failing. And to them, I say, once again, I didn't invent corruption. It was there when I got there. In fact, the first day that I raced at Roosevelt Raceway, my first parimutuel race, I was approached. The first day, nobody even knew me. I was approached and asked if I liked my horse, what I thought, and everything else. And I won't go into that, and I won't mention any names, but I was approached. I won that race. The next night, I had another horse in, and I was approached again. And I said, listen, I just don't want to get involved, and I won that race. And they didn't bother me too much after that. But the point I'm trying to bring out is that it was there long before I got there. And I know what went on in the thoroughbred industry because I was involved in both divisions of racing, harness racing and thoroughbreds through the years. And like I said, I'm jumping back and forth, but trying to provide some information that would answer some questions. I know what went on in the thoroughbred industry from New York to California. And like I said, this stuff was going on long before me. And all the Hall of Fame jockeys that were found innocent from New York to New Jersey, and all of them in the Hall of Fame, I know what I did. I know who I paid. I know which one of them guys I paid. And they were found innocent and good for them. But it was going on. And long before I got there. I just did it better. Now, the reason I did it better was because I had to do it better because of the situation that I was in, that Tannenbaum put me in. Now, let me just say a little bit about what Tannenbaum did to me, because a lot of people say, well, you could have got out of the business, you could have did this, you could have did that. I mentioned before I couldn't get out of the business. I couldn't get out of the business because I had at the time maybe now 7, 8 horses that I got, and I had a commitment to Tommy Lucchese, who was still alive. I made a commitment to my mother after the tongue lashing I got from Lucchese, and I just couldn't get myself to abuse my mother anymore. I just I couldn't do it. And I says I'll figure out a way, because they got to be somewhere along the line. There has to be there has to be a hearing. There has to be justice. There has to be something for a guy who changed his life around, who didn't do anything wrong, but was accused by the owner of a racetrack who had strong political ties, that was a crook and an embezzler himself, which is on the record. And I couldn't get to him without $20,000 and a connection. And because of him, that put me on a path that I had no choice to take because of the situation that I was in. So, as far as I'm concerned, whatever happened after that was a cause and effect. Whatever happened after that, whatever I did after that, was caused by Marty Tannenbaum. Had he not thrown me out, nothing that follows ever would have happened. And I'm going to get into a lot of it next week. I There's just so much that I have to try to explain to the thousands of viewers that call in and write in with questions, trying to get it straight. And after I give my explanation why I did what I did, and I'm making no excuses. All I'm asking, and all I asked of the people that asked me the same questions earlier, was just put yourself in my shoes. Is there anybody out there that would not have done what I've done and taken the road that I took if your life and your mother's life were in serious, serious jeopardy? And for those who said they still wouldn't do it, I have to take my hat off to you, because I would have given my life to save my mother. And naturally, everybody does whatever they have to do to save themselves. But I'll get into it. I'll get into it more. I can't do all of this in one shot. So maybe next Tuesday, or even before, I'll finish this. And if it takes 2 or 3 more podcasts, I'm going to finish it, because there's a lot of people out there that just don't understand what I did. And also, I have to give thanks to many of the people that helped me along the way. And I'm going to do that maybe next week. And until then, I'll see you.